Hey guys, what's up? This is Freenachos, and in this video we're going to go over single restful in position prefill brazier delayed c-betting. And again, this is going to be quite an interesting mode because there is going to be a lot of things that we can do in order to exploit our opponents, as we'll see in the data in like the second. I guess like it's the fourth side, but like the second point here, like the pool plays this one relatively weak as the out of position player, and therefore we can do a lot of exploiting. First we go into equilibrium, then I'm going to show you guys some data. We're going to do some strategy development, and in this case we're specifically going to do some sim work. And the sim work will show you guys how subtle changes in out of position strategy can lead to very big deviations in our strategy, very large exploits. Alright, so first of all, here you can see that the betting frequency is going to be more or less the same on most of the textures. So no massive differences. There's slight differences. On some textures we're going to be betting a little bit more, some textures a little bit less, but nothing too significant. And most of the differences you actually see in how the pool plays and how we should play versus how the pool plays. As I'll show you in a sec. So take this in for a second, but don't spend too much time on it, trying to understand why this is the way it is. It's much more important that you understand how the pool's playing. All right, so the pool overfolds and underraises versus delayed c-bets. This is a very common trend, and you'll see this in every pool, like even the pools that are defending most, like the Bodok, Ignition, like the US segregated pools, they tend to defend quite a bit, but still that pool is overfolding versus specifically a small delayed c-bet and underraising significantly. You can see that here as well. Versus a quarter pot bet, the pool folds as often as a solver is versus a half pot bet. So you can see that immediately that the pool is overfolding quite significantly, and you can see here the difference between the folding frequencies of the pool and the solver are significant. Same thing goes for the raising frequency, and then here you can see still overfolding, and versus the larger sizes still overfolding. Now, to be fair, like the gap is closing a little bit, and especially for the larger sizes, pool gets closer and closer every year that I've done this research. So keep that in mind, and especially if you're playing in competitive environments, like let's say you're playing 1K or 2K on most sides, I wouldn't expect massive overfolds, although you can still expect a slight overfold here and slight underraise here. But if you're playing in most other pools, then this will be true. All right, so what we're going to do now. Oh wait, one more thing. The pool overfolds versus check bet and overbluffs in check bet. So in other words, if we have a weak hand on the turn, we are incentivized to bet it ourselves, as those hands under-realize a bit on the river as we face a bet more often, right? So let's say we have king queen as an example, king queen high on the turn, and let's say the solver is checking that most of the times, but then once it checks back on the turn, if it faces a bet on the river, it's folding the majority of the times. Then the moment that you are facing a bet on the river more often, the EV of checking on the turn goes down. Does it make sense? So if we have king queen high, in other words, if we have a hand that is folding versus a bet on the river always, then we are like the checking EV of the turn goes down. If the pool is overbluffing. So again, I'm just going to reiterate that we have king queen. If we check back and we face a bet, then we always fold. Let's just assume that is true. And if our opponent just bets always, we are folding always, and so checking becomes a horrible option. That's like basically what I'm saying. In other words, you're not realizing the same amount of equity because your opponent is going to be betting the river too often. That's one, right? And the other side of it is your king queen might function better as a bet because your opponent is going to overfold the turn, underraise the turn, and overfold the river subsequently. So like the weaker hands favor betting slightly more. Let's say the middling hands, like the second, third pair type hands, those are fine checking because you just get an overbluff on the river and just click call. So you check back turn and you click call the river. And sometimes you need to raise those hands, by the way, but that's a different story. All right, so I'm going to load up Pio and I'm going to show you guys what this looks like, in particular what this looks like on different flops, turns, and rivers. All right, so here we are button versus big blind in a single raised pot, and I'm opening 9-6-3 here, 2-tone. This would be a board where, as the imposition player, you're going to check quite often, as you have all these higher cards that are not great, and then it connects with like the 9-6-3 quite often, like because he has all these hands that we don't really have, and so we want to bet bigger and just basically bet like 10s and up and some strong 9s, but we don't really want to bet smaller pairs like pocket 4s or pocket 7s as often. All right, so we check back and then we get to a turn, and let's say we go to a 5 of hearts, right? Betting frequency is quite substantial. Maybe we just go for a slightly different one. 4-4. Let's go for the 4. Create a subtree. So what we are doing now is we're going to say, okay, from this point on, I want to build a new tree. So everything that happened before is just fixed. Like we are going to throw this away. We're going to cut this part out and then start and build a new tree. And the reason we do that is, well, 2 reasons. One is you don't have to node lock the flop and everything. And because otherwise, if you make some changes in the flop strategy, then what the solver is going to do, it's going to, let's say you say that the out of position player, the big blind, is going to make a mistake on the turn. What the solver will do is it will realize that it is forced to make a mistake on the turn, and so it will change its flop strategy to make sure that it doesn't end up in that node as often. So that is one thing, and you can fix that by just not locking everything, but now you don't have to, which is great. And then the second thing, and this is like the main thing, is because the tree is a lot smaller now, we don't have to solve the flop again and everything. Node locking and running the tree will go a lot quicker. So we are clicking build tree here, we click go, and then we can see that it's loading. I set the accuracy quite low. I'm actually going to put that at half a big blind. Let's see. It is picking like a bunch of different bet sizes. It doesn't really matter too much. And imposition has like, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simplify the game tree a little bit because, well, we can. And we're just going to make sure that both the out of position and the imposition player are going to play a quarter pot sizing. This will obviously trim down the game tree a lot more. And so now it will run relatively quickly. So you can see now it just goes down and down, and then with like 10 seconds or something like that, you're going to be there. Here we are. This is going to be a suboptimal strategy for both players, which is going to be fine. Doesn't really matter too much. We just want to have a simple game tree. In position is betting 40%, out of position a little bit more. And the reason is just out of position has a lot more of these lower cards, like we said before. So this is just a board where if you go into the range explorer, you'll see in the equity graph that the out of position player is doing quite okay. Like he has the top of the range. The in position player has the bottom of the range, but that doesn't really matter too much. Because obviously it's the top of the range that you want to have. And so you're allowed to bet very often as the out of position player. Should out of position check, then we are, as the in position player, betting this frequency. Anyway, like if we bet here, we're going to see a raise relatively often, like 19%, which is like very significant. We are going to raise not very often. I would have expected this to be relatively often as well. Usually this is around 10% on average. Now maybe a little bit more versus the small sizing in particular. The reason why it is a little bit less now is because there's just one sizing. And so like the strong hands, like pocket 9s, pocket 6s, 9-6, 5-7 are also betting in a smaller size. Whereas if we just real quickly go and give the out of position player an option to bet bigger as well, then you will see that some of those hands Like 6s is mainly choosing bigger sizing, 4s, 3s, 5, 7, all mainly choosing a bigger sizing. Pocket 9s is still block betting, and the reason is you block calls, right? So like if you have 2 9s in your hand, you don't want to bet very large, because if you bet very large, then the main calls that you're going to be finding are like these ones, the 9s, and you block that very heavily, whereas these ones are like more indifferent. So in other words, if you have 2 9s in your hand and you're overbetting here, you're just getting way too many folds. So this is the perfect hand to mix in as a block bet. Anyway, block betting, and now you can see it just goes up quite a bit. And the reason is, if you have multiple bet sizes, what the solver will do is it will make sure that there's some strong hands that make it into the smaller bet size, as you can see here. So pocket 6s sometimes, pocket 9s quite often, 5 7 sometimes going to block bet, but mostly 9 6 block betting. Mostly what you'll see is the bigger size will be much stronger than the smaller size, and so because this is now a weaker size, you get to raise more liberally. Suddenly, like ace 9 becomes an okay raise, king 9 becomes an okay raise, because it just doesn't contain as many strong hands. And again, if you give it just one bet size here, then what will happen is all those hands that make it into that big bet size will now be forced to bet smaller, and therefore we can't raise as often. I didn't expect it to be this significant, but whatever. All right, so here we are. Now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, let's just lock this. So we're just going to lock all hands for the out of position player and make sure that he is not able to change his strategy at all. The reason we do that is because if we are going to say, let's say he checks, we bet small, and we're going to node lock this node. Let's say that we are going to, well, let's do it. Let's say that check raise is 19. Let's just go ahead and say that the average reg is just going to get to 9 there. And so he's not overfolding at all. We just want to node lock that he's under check raising, which we can see in the data. So we lock that, lock. Cool, here we are, 9%. Should we have not locked this probing strategy, then what would happen is when it's forced to make a mistake versus a delayed c-bet, so it was forced to make a mistake after checking, it would just say, okay, well, I'm just going to bet more often, because all of these hands are indifferent between betting and checking. But if I check these, I'm now forced to make a mistake, whereas if I bet them, I can still play my normal strategy on the rest of the hand. And so I'm just incentivized to bet them more. And we don't want that. We want to see what would the solver do if it's forced to make the mistake that the pool's making. Now, to be completely honest, part of the reason why the solver is under raising is because it is not finding hands like pocket 6s as often as a check. Pocket 4s, pocket 3s are not checking as often in reality, especially in weaker environments, as they are in a solver, and that is one of the reasons why they are under raising. So it's also a matter of the range being different the moment that that they face a small bet. For now, we just want to understand, okay, what happens to our roughly 40% betting frequency if they're not raising enough? We know that this is not perfect. It's definitely wrong. But as they say, all models are wrong, some are useful, and this is hopefully going to be a more useful model. So we want to see, okay, pool is not overfolding, but they're raising not often enough. What is going to happen to our delayed c-betting frequency? So what I do now is I'm going to click go. And again, this strategy will remain the same because we locked it. It's still probing 62% of the times. But you can see now the in-position player is allowed to range bet. And the reason is quite simple. Well, let's say you have a hand that wasn't really betting the turn. Let's say queen or something like that. King jack, I'm showing those were hands that are checking quite often on the turn. The reason that they were checking initially is, well, if you bet it, then 20% of the times you get check raise and you have to always fold it. Whereas if you check it now, then you get closer to the river, you can spike a king, you can spike a queen, but more importantly, you are getting into a situation where sometimes the turn goes check, the river goes check, and you win, your king, queen higher wins. And I'll show you that in a second. I'm just going to go back, click build tree and click go here so that we have the equilibrium strategy again. And so we can see, now we're back here, king queen wants to check here. Now let's say we check, and the river is like a, I don't know, 3, and you get another check. Then here king queen is checking down for EV for 2 big blinds. For almost half the pot, which seems quite a bit actually. I wonder if I set this in percentages, that could be true as well. Anyway, it's checking back for quite a bit. Let's see if, oh yeah, so yeah, no, that's actually 2 big blinds. It's because on this run out, the other position player is just checking heaps and it's just giving up like hands like jack 10, 10 8, stuff like that. It's never betting. That's the reason why he doesn't want to bet. You can see that betting and checking the EV, if you look at the bottom right in that grid, you can see that those are relatively close to one another. If you look at the king of clubs, queen of spades on the bottom left of the grid, you can see that the EVs for that hand is exactly the same. So it doesn't really matter in equilibrium whether you bet or check. For this combo in a vacuum, like if you just had that combo, you couldn't make an EV mistake. So it is relatively close. But in equilibrium, you'd want to check because, like, one, if you bet here and you get that raise like 18.5% of the times, you'd always have to fold. And so you'd be in a situation where you wouldn't really want to bet it. And then the other thing is, like, you bet it, but you are going to make hands fold that you beat, right? Hands that you dominate. And so, like, let's say your river is a queen. It's actually not great to make queen 10, queen jack, king 10 fold, right? We don't really want that. We want him to hit a king when he has king 10, and we hit a king with our king queen, and then we win a pretty big pot still. And we don't really make better hands fold, like some ace 8 is folding, but that's like very, very minimal. The rest is just basically defending. So we can't really bet for value much. We have a reasonable like checking EV, and there's a lot of branches of the game tree where we check down for some percentage of the pot, and so we want to be checking equilibrium. Now, again, if you just say, okay, well, we need to look at this again. If you're just saying, okay, well, we are going to lower that tax, quote unquote tax of betting, which is like getting check raised from, what was it? Oh, wait, here. From 18, we said to 9, and then suddenly you bet everything. You bet your entire range. Let's play around with this a little bit, and let's say we go to 14. So only a minor check raising mistake. We click go, and still we are going to be betting. Well, like once you get into like the 75-ish region, you get really close to being able to bet your entire range. Especially if you consider that like now any minor overfold. So let's say that this almost 40 is going to be 42. So the slight overfolds, you can see that immediately we are going to be, actually I expected this to go up much more. The probably with 80% you'll be betting range pretty much. Like simplifying to a range bet here now would cost you almost no EV, if any EV at all. When we can check that real quick by just saying, okay, well, let's say given these constraints, we are just going to bet our entire range weight. Then we need to first check the EV, 18.07. And let's say we are saying, no, okay, well, we want to bet our entire range. Here, 18.07. And then like, this strategy is already locked, and then versus the small bet, this strategy is also locked. So villain won't exploit you, right? Given the fact that we range bet here. Let me click go. 18.07. So given the fact that your opponent is going to be making mistakes, the EV is more or less the same. You're losing 0.5% in EV, roughly speaking. All right, so now you can see that this is relatively sensitive, right? If you make minor adjustments to your opponent's defense, then you should be playing relatively aggressively. Now let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what can we learn from this, right? Because you could argue, well, we should just bet our range and move on with life. And I think that would be the wrong conclusion to draw here. What you'd want to do is you want to be aware of the incentives that the pool lays out. In this case, they're not raising often enough, which means you're more incentivized to bet. They are overfolding versus bet, which means you're more incentivized to bet. And therefore, we are going to be betting significantly more often. Now, if we go back to the equilibrium strategy here, then what we can do is we can say, okay, we are betting more often. Let's say you're playing one hand versus a player that you know is relatively weak. You could just bet range, right? That would not be a mistake. If it's your last hand of poker, betting range would be okay. The thing is, if you're betting range here, your opponent might be able to counter that, right? So let's say that he sees that you consistently bet range. He can see that in your HUD or in a live game. He can just see that you're betting way too often in all of these little spots. Or even like if he can't really see it in your HUD that you're betting this specific now too often, but he sees that if you do these types of things too often because you're too aggressive in general, that's something that people can pick up on quite quickly, then suddenly like you leave yourself open to being exploited. And just to show you like what that exploit could cost you, 18.48 is the EV in equilibrium. Now let's say we are just going to range bet and we are letting our opponents hard exploit us. So we are saying, okay, I'm going to range bet as the imposition player. I'm just telling you right now, exploit me as hard as you can. And we'll ask the solver to do that, who can do that perfectly, obviously. 18.26. I can't remember what it was. Damn. 18.26, build tree, go, and here 18.26, and in equilibrium you are, that's the average position, 18.41. Wait, what I'm doing wrong here? Let's look at the imposition EV. I'm messing up a little bit here. I'm sorry about that. So let's say 33, like 33. I'm just going to range bet now. So again, we want to see the EV here of what would the range bet cost us if our opponent is able to hard exploit that. So let's say 32.89. Let's remember that. 32.89. 32.89. You can see that the hard exploit is, well, villain is just going to check everything to us because we are just always going to bet, and then it's just going to check raise. Like you can see 57%. And you can see 18.27. So a very massive, like basically the EVs are reversed here, which is just insane. So this is the reason why in practice, you probably want to bet too often, and you want to make sure that you are, well, like a good like metaphor would be, imagine you could steal people's money by being a pickpocketer. Then like people are not really going to know, like they might lose in the end. They might like look at their pockets and they'll be like, well, I lost my wallet, I'm not sure where it is. Probably someone stole it, maybe I dropped it, who knows. But they're definitely not going to know that it's you. As opposed to like the range bet would be, you like rob them point blank at a crowded square. Well, you might get the wallet this time. It's quite likely that you won't be able to do that consistently for some time. Sorry for the violent metaphor, it just popped into my head. All right, so that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, definitely hit me up in the Discord, and talk to you guys soon. Bye.